G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube for the final review of the season. After being run over by Sydney in a game of two halves yesterday at Optus Stadium. Unfortunately, I was in the air during the game flying home from Bali, so I only got the chance to watch it and put the review out today. And I just wanted to take my time and not rush my review of the final game of the season. For today's episode, though, I'll be covering a brief overview of the match, who our best players were, including the promising performances from younger guys who may not have been in our best, but definitely showed promise, and then my key takeaways from the match. I was going to put my end of year review with this video, by the way, but figured that deserves a full video of its own. So that will hopefully make for some good viewing during the bye week before finals. So we'll just get straight to the match. Knowing the scores before I started watching did put a little dampener on the early lead we took, unfortunately, but it didn't prepare me for how perfect our football was in that first quarter. Pretty much every player across every play that we had for quite a long period, I think almost the majority of the quarter, really. I won't say all, but they really outperformed themselves and executed their disposal to perfection. In that first 5 minutes alone, the guys that stood out to me were Tim Kelly, Brady Hoff, Elijah Hewitt, and Matt Flynn, who somehow managed to work together, all those guys, for about three separate chains of play for the first three goals of the match to West Coast. So it was really kind of just interesting. It was just the same combination of those four guys, just about every play that got ourselves inside 50 for about 5 minutes. The second quarter actually tagged in a completely new handful of players that were really rising to the top. So I think it was McCarthy, Chesser, and Bazzo who really started to get into just about everything during that period, while Hewitt and Kelly were still in our best. And you could see Sydney made just a few tweaks after quarter time and that break just to, I think, stem some of the control we had. But they still didn't look like they were in control of the match for any real period of that second quarter. And I'd be really curious to know if I'd have thought we were looking like we were going to win at half time if I didn't already know that we lost. Maybe some people watching, commenting, saying how confident they felt. I mean, obviously knowing where we're at, you need a pretty decent lead to be feeling like you're going to win, but it certainly looked like we're playing some very good football. Unfortunately, after half-time, we did see a fairly familiar side, which was pretty much just the limitations of a young side against a much more developed senior squad, and Sydney just ran away with it. It wasn't total dominance by Sydney, but it was a lot of conversions and then no dominant periods from us at all during the second half. So by the end of the game, a lot of our hard work did get overshadowed by the scoreboard, but I hope I'm not alone in saying that I appreciated the small victories in what the quarter time and the halftime leads did for me as a fan. And then, as usual, the individual performances were really exciting, especially from a heap of younger players. So going straight into the best, my best player from last night was Jack Graham. Across four quarters, he consistently was in our best players, every single one of those. And even though I normally describe his work rate as one of our non-quantity players, I actually thought that what he did with the ball in hands was way above his usual output. So it goes without saying that his defensive work was off the charts as usual. He finished with 22 pressure acts and 9 tackles. But he was actually part of a ton of just chains of play, a lot of the time starting them. And his disposal and the space that he created with the ball in hand was really impressive. It did actually lead me to wonder a little bit if Sydney's pressure rating was a bit low, just because in general I thought all of our ball movement last night was cleaner and more effective than usual. So I'm not sure if that was the cause or whether we've just sort of found our feet under pressure, but it's not something I can find after the game, that pressure rating throughout. Anyway, the next best for me had to be Job Shanahan. He finished with 3 goals, 2. And for me, that's something that sits in my mind as a first-year player who could have easily kicked 5 last night. And look, I know a lot of people would argue that if you can't kick the goals and follow through on your set shots, then it doesn't count. But for me, it's just the fact that a first-year forward has regularly been able to manufacture enough shots on goal to be kicking 3 goals, 2 is what impresses me. The 3 goals was an equal game high, and he looked dominant against the Sydney key defence, which, again, is very impressive when you consider that he is our primary key forward. So he's not getting away with the third opposition defender or any other freebies that he might have if we had Waterman and Allen out there with him. Tim Kelly, again, had another great night of his best footy once again. That first quarter in particular, he looked like a Rolls Royce, just really slick ball movement from the contest. He finished with 24 disposals for the night. 11 of them were contested. I'm really excited for next year with Kelly, just because in general, he doesn't strike me as a guy who's going to slow down with age. And I mainly base that on the fact that he doesn't rely on power to play his best footy from the inside as a mid. So with Elliot Yeo hopefully back to full strength next year in the middle, and another year under guys like Reid, Hewitt, Hall, and even Tom Gross, I think we're going to be fielding a really quality, pure midfield again for the first time as of 2026. Next best for me was a bit of a hard one to place, by the way, because watching the first half, I was actually convinced that I'd be talking about Matt Flynn first as our best player, but he didn't sustain that dominance for the entire game. And as always, what I see him do out there didn't actually convert onto the stats sheet so well with, I think, Brodie Grundy clearly taking the ruck honours, purely the ruck that is against Flynn and Bailey Williams. What I will say, though, is for that first quarter especially, he just looked like he was everywhere, in the air, at ground level, stopping the ball, a kick behind the play and handing off goals, which he did give his goal to Jamie Cripps, and then he kicked another one later anyway. So I know that West Coasters going to have to search for a top-tier ruckman, which at the moment it's actually looking like we'll have to go to the draft, which will have a bit of a wait on when, potentially Cooper Duff Tyler is the one I'm talking about matures. But in the meantime, I've really enjoyed watching Flynn overachieve this year and help us be competitive in the ruck for the first time in a few years now. So I've got him in my best, and also huge fan of the heart that he's shown all year for West Coast. I know there's fans that don't love what he does out there just purely because of his limitations, but I would say to that, just try and imagine what we'd look like if he wasn't in our side this year. I also had Liam Baker in my bests to round out the top 5 for us. It was another Liam Baker performance in what he still, gets to be called a known quantity for us week in, week out. So I guess the only thing I can add to, I think we've all come to expect, is that he performed well for us again in the last game of the year, and I'm pretty sure he's going to walk in and take our best and fairest for 2025 at the John Worsfold Medal Night. So I'm not sure if there's betting on that, but it wouldn't be smart to bet on other players at the moment. Brady Hoff's performance can't be overlooked in our best either. He was really damaging early in the game, getting a lot of the ball through the middle of the ground, running off halfback. Just his evasiveness and quick decision-making really hurt Sydney. And like I said in my overview of the match, he had a big hand in a lot of our early scoring. I also thought Tom Cole and Clay Hall were both up there in our top performers. Hall competed really hard all night, showed great output and work rate with 17 disposals and 6 tackles, but more importantly, his defensive pressure was a lot better this week after a couple of weeks in a row where you really notice his chasing visibly wasn't up to it, and then it was a lot better again this week. Cole, I thought, played his best game for the year, going at a very necessary disposal efficiency of 85% in a backline that was under siege. So his 20 disposals and 5 tackles were, I think, all really well spent last night. If you thought I overdid our best players, by the way, the list of promising players is probably going to be quite long as well. I'm sure everybody's keen to talk about Luca Grego on his debut last night, the Indominus Rex. By the way, I felt compelled to add my personal nickname in there just because once you see it, you can't unsee it. So look up that one if you haven't watched the Jurassic Worlds. It's his neutral body stance, just in case you're wondering. I couldn't put a finger on it until now. Anyway, he had a great first game. He looked composed from the very first moment he was near the footy and just casually looks completely at home out there on the AFL field. It's actually a shame he debuted in the final round because if there were more games this year, I'm certain he'd be playing next one and probably the one after that. But the preseason tends to be a reset. So as always, I don't think there needs to be any rush for Grego. And I'm really confident that long-term he will be a best 23 player for us. Campbell Chesser, another promising player, had another great night. I was stoked to hear his 2-year contract extension came through during the week, which I think we all knew was pretty inevitable after what he's been doing. He didn't get as much of it as last week, but there were a couple of elite moments where he just showed his pace to break lines. And like I said last week, he's actually, I think, got another breakout game coming at some point where he shows that he plays elite footy and tears teams apart and goes to another level. So, like I've already mentioned, he's had his breakout game to play AFL footy, and the next one will be a breakout game as an elite footballer. Noah Long was another promising performance for me. Geez, he looked good. I have no idea what happened to Long for the majority of this season. But it was a bit like Kelly. He seems to have just flicked a switch at around the same time as Kelly, and suddenly he's playing his damaging best, which was a great way to finish the season. But felt a bit like he only just got his momentum up and then hit that stop sign or the red light. So I'm really looking forward to this version of Noah Long arriving from round 1 in 2026. Anyway, that covers the 3 promising players as well, and what I'm sure you could call my disgustingly positive take on best and promising players, considering the scoreline from last night. So I'll get to my key takeaways and have a little look at the team side of things. My key takeaway was that the execution and intensity that we saw in the first half, in the first quarter especially, for me, is quite literally a preview of what we'll be doing over 4 quarters for a lot more games next year, just when the younger side in the AFL gets another preseason under their belt and a lot more experience. So we've easily been the younger side out there, and I think Luca Grego last night was correct me, this is off the top of my head, I haven't researched, but the 10th player to debut for us as well. So it might not sound like a huge number, but that's pretty nuts when you think about how many guys you can even bring onto a list in a single season, just to give that perspective. If I were to go through all the young guys who can only get older, stronger, more experienced, and then tell you what the shift between now and 2026 is going to look like, I think it's going to be massive. And I'm actually really excited to put out my series of players to watch out for in 2026 later in the year. And that'll happen once the squad's been finalised, which is after trade and draft period. So don't hold your breath. That's going to be sometime in November when that's ready. Anyway, that's all from my final review of the 2025 home and away season. I hope anybody watching feels the same way about the direction that the side is moving in, or at the very least, some of my disgusting positivity has rubbed off a little bit. All things considered, I think this season was a big step forward on the last couple of years. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to covering the off-season content for West Coast. So just because our season is finished, the coverage won't stop there. As always, though, thanks for everyone who's tuned in this year, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again for the next phase of reviews. So cheers until then.